Well, hey, this video is going to be so amazing. I'm so excited because we get to talk about, at least situate this in a recent trip that you took. Do you want to talk about your trip, Chris?
Yeah, so after we wrapped up in Poland, after presenting at the Holistic Think Tank conference, my partner, my wife and I, Cynthia and I, went to Berlin and Denmark just for fun, just for to do it. And as part of that trip, we got to visit the Lego headquarters in Billund, Denmark. And Cynthia's old roommate works for Lego with her husband. So we got a private tour of Lego. And part of that was I snapped this pic because it stood out to me because I was like, man, this sounds a lot like the stuff that we talk about.
We thought we would use that as context for this video to talk not just about Chris's exceptional trip to the Lego headquarters, but the principles behind play. And we're going to be talking our way through a document that's produced by the Lego Foundation. But I thought we would also just watch this quick little video called The Play Pledge. It's just about a minute long from the Lego Foundation. Awesome. So,
God, that was a
yeah,
really
so
well done video. Yeah.
it's so good, right? Just stick kids in this boring context, give them a roll of
I
paper
like
and
at
kids.
the bottom here that no paper was harmed in the making of this video. We recycled it all.
I don't know, it did look like a little bit of paper was harmed in that process, I'm not gonna lie. So despite, right, my adult anxieties, my parent anxiety about mess and all those other kinds of things aside, you give kids, something as simple as a roll of paper, and what do they do with it? They make the world, right? They make bow ties and spaceships and fortune tellers, and they tell stories with it. They enact playful, imaginative things with it. And of course, that's going to be at the core of a toy, particularly like Lego, that where it's a blank template for you to do exactly that. And that's where I thought perhaps we could pull up this document, Chris, because it goes a lot deeper than just like, hey, let's give kids the freedom and space to play. There's a lot of research base that actually goes into informing the values, the approach, why it is a valuable practice. It's not a distraction from learning. It is, in fact, the way that kids learn. And one of the first things that you'll notice as we go through this is this quote from Seymour Papert, who is a person we just talked about in our most recent video here as the founder of this idea of constructionism. Is this idea from Papert that we actually make the world through models? Sometimes they're physical models, sometimes there's models in digital space. Anytime you've made a graphic organizer, right, or a mind map or some sort of model to kind of represent your thoughts in physical space, you are doing that. And in fact, when kids play with a toy like Legos or Minecraft or maker spaces or any of these other things, that is in fact what they're doing. So the quote, of course, rather than pushing children to think like adults, we might do better to remember that they are great learners and try harder to be more like them. Don't impress your adult risk aversions and aversions to mess and anxiety and all those things. Actually embody kids and embrace learning through play.
What fascinated me about visiting the Lego HQ is
Yeah.
that we were able to get into there's like the museum, like the history museum that's open to the public. But then I think there's like this, it's almost like an employees only. I mean, Lego's a huge company, it's like thousands of people. So they have their own separate little tiny museum that just goes through the history of the founders. It's still a family owned company. So the factory is quite literally built on the guy's house. His house is still there. They just built the factory around it, which is quite wild. On the walls throughout, they talk a lot about their mission and vision, and a lot of it relates to Popper and like early like Vygotsky, and other like learning designers, child developmental psychologists, play-based folks. It's not just like we make fun toys that kids like, but there is an intentionality based around trying to make the best possible product for kids. But the thing that really honed into me that sense of the HRP connection is that it's all very systematized and systems based, literally and figurative. Figuratively, because they're focusing a lot on play as a concept and like using your imagination. And obviously, like Lego are designed to be just kind of tinkered with and messed with and played with. But from the Lego angle, it's also literally because the blocks are a system. It used to be called like a learning system. That used to be the actual name. It was like Lego Learning System or something like that.
Let's go ahead then and let's talk through a little bit of what the document is setting up in terms of like why they've leaned into these values. Do you just want to then, Chris, read what those principles of play are that the Lego
Yeah.
Foundation talks about, and then we can go into more detail and see those examples?
Yeah, so when I was touring the Lego HQ, it's like the second floor of the main building is the Lego Foundation, which is the nonprofit wing of Lego. And they like study play, they reimagine play, they're the people that actually get into the weeds of what it is that they're actually doing. And obviously you have the product side actually making the content. They have this really cool graphic, and I took a picture of this called the 5 key characteristics that unlock playful learning. And you can see there's 5 different things listed here. And this is kind of like what guides their methodology. I'll zoom in a bit here. Apologies for the little graininess here. So the first that they define is actively engaging. When a child is really involved in an activity, they take charge of their learning. Making decisions and pushing away distractions have long-term benefits for what's called executive control, how we focus, plan, remember instructions, and juggle tasks.
Well, the ultimate irony, I've said this probably half a dozen times now in the videos that we've done, is that on the one hand, we've actively limited the ability of kids of younger and younger ages as we formalize education more and more as for younger and younger kids, their ability to actually make decisions about the world and what they're doing in them. And then those decisions actually have consequences. Sometimes they're positive, sometimes they're negative, sometimes they're neutral or whatever, but we limit their agency and their autonomy in there. And then we get mad as those kids age through the formal education system and we start to have them make more decisions about what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And they can't.
Right. And the long term impact of not being given the time to learn executive control, AKA placing kids on tablets or having them watch movies
Right.
or do something that's very passive, is the opposite of that. It's difficult for children as they grow older to focus, plan, remember instructions, and juggle tasks. You see that right now as a teacher, or as an adult. If you were growing up and if you kind of grew up in that type of environment, this stuff actually does matter for child development. The second element to unlocking playful learning is that it's meaningful. Playful learning is meaningful when it links new experiences, like seeing a horse in a field, to familiar ones, like a horse in a children's favorite picture book. Drawing those connections expands children's grasp of the world, and it lights up a number of different areas of the brain: motivation, sense making, reflection, and memory.
We're always talking about these things in isolation from one another, aren't we? Motivation is its own separate thing. Sense making is its own different thing. Reflection is and memory. So memory, of course, is like the building background knowledge through experiences. And this is really where, providing safe places for kids to be able to have a range of meaningful, playful experiences actually enriches background knowledge that's going to be a boon to future academic learning because they're going to be able to make connections from their experiences in the world and at play and the world of home to then the world of school. But too often, right, kids from impoverished backgrounds aren't able to get those experiences because there's not safe enriched spaces for them to do that before they get into a formal school environment. And then, right, with the frustration of the institution, the frustration of teachers, right, that these kids don't have any background knowledge coming into it. We need to build it, then is a much bigger hurdle than providing those enriched experiences beforehand.
Or even just having the opportunity to bring in a children's experience at all, or
Yeah.
listen to kids to even know what these experiences are in the first place. I
Yep.
think that if we were critiquing school, it would be fairly difficult to make the claim that much of school is actively engaging or meaningful to the individuals that are in the room, sadly.
Yeah. The
Um,
irony here, can you pull up that video again real quick? Just the first part, there you go, of the desk. If we just see the
mhm.
kids sitting at this empty desk, imagine desks all in rows, imagine, right, kids just kind of waiting to be instructed in what to do next, right? They're being trained towards this kind of passivity. They're not able to make decisions. Or imagine a context where they're given this paper and then told to do very specific, particular things with it, or being scolded or punished for doing exactly what that kid just did, knocking it off the
Yeah,
table, tearing it out, right? Crumpling it up into all of these, different states that mean something to kids, but don't necessarily have a lot of educational value from an adult perspective.
right. I mean, learning is inherently messy, and
Yeah,
it doesn't fit into that organized, safe, not safe as in it's actually going to cause physical danger, but this idea that if someone walks by and sees your classroom and kids are acting in this way, they're going to think that it's an unsafe environment because kids are being kids
right.
and they're learning by doing things in a playful way, which is what kids do.
There's a lot to be said about the interpersonal, um, figuring out interpersonal relationships on the playground, in a space that's not moderated by adults where they're going to come swoop in and solve all those problems. Of course, right? Again, safety, ensuring both emotional, social, physical safety is the role of adults in that context. But in these low stakes ways, kids more often than not can figure out these things on their own. So yeah, the social construction of these is just as important as the individual aspects too.
Right. And something I wanted to note too, this is kind of sad, but I noticed it at the beginning here. This initial study where they say 84% of children wish they had more time to play. The actual statistic comes from a
Yeah.
Lego study where they said 84% of children wish they had more time to play with their parents, which
Yikes! Jeez.
I mean, that feels so. I mean, I mean, you can't have too much of a good thing, I guess. But still, at the
Yeah.
exact same time, that seems like a really high number, and it just feels kind of. We've set up a society in which children are more and more separated away from their parents, um, and don't have that time to meaningfully interact and construct those social spaces, which is very sad.
Right. Just anecdotally, I will say that my kids being of ages 8 and 5, to actually be able to, like, play video games, like, we play board games and all these other kinds of things too, but to actually, like, get on and play Switch games together has just been so much fun, because we get to kind of break down, the relationship, in a more kind of playful way. We got Smash Bros. Ultimate for the Switch the other weekend, and we just played the heck out of that thing. And it's just so much fun to overcome those challenges, be unlocking new characters, trying everything out in that space has been a lot of fun.
So the next one on here for playful experiences is being joyful. This is all about the joy of discovery. Joyful play sparks the brain's reward centers, triggering a feel good chemical called dopamine. Higher dopamine is linked to better memory, attention, creativity, mental flexibility, and motivation.
Yeah,
It's
we kind
true.
of talked about that a
Yeah.
little bit. Um,
Yeah.
Now what's interesting, Chris, sorry, I was also scrolling through, bounce real quick to the document. What you had just said there in with the impact of joyful play actually helps, right? This is what they're saying here that longitudinal studies underscore the need for supporting a breadth of skills in children. Their ability to share ideas and resources, be helpful and listen to others, all help predict their level of education and job situation. These things can all be developed through the context of play. And they say playful experiences in the early years allow you to acquire attention, self control, spatial understanding, motivation and confidence, problem solving, and reflection. And if you scroll down just to the next page to kind of show, yeah, the critical skills for
Yeah.
learning throughout a lifetime to a successful adulthood, education, innovation, health. and a job. So really building those foundations for joyful play can actually lead to, more positive experiences in adulthood later on too.
I mean, it's one of those things where these things I hope would be obvious without having to have the ends justify the means.
Right.
Like one of the concerns that I always have about some forms of play-based education and professional development is that it treats it like, oh, we need kids to be prepared for jobs of the 21st century, so they need to be doing intentional play or something like that, where they're
Right.
pitching uh joy as some way to feed the economics machine, whereas it really should just be because like play is just a natural way of learning and it's fun, it's what we like doing, so therefore we should do it. It doesn't have to have these economic outcomes. Like if those economic outcomes didn't exist, does that mean that we should want these kids to be sitting at these empty rooms like this? I'd hope not. And just to wrap it up, the last thing they say is that playful learning is unlocked through iteration or being iterative.
Yeah.
Practice
Yeah.
makes creative. When children keep adapting and improving games, skills, ideas, and activities, they're firing up reward and memory networks. In the long term, that's linked to flexible, innovative thinking. People won't always experience all of those characteristics at the same time, and that's fine, but it's another reason we need lots of different kinds of play. Each strand helps weave a strong and flexible tapestry of skills to use throughout our lives.
Again, thinking about like play in a classroom context is really hard, because it does involve a lot of taking on risk and giving over a lot of agency and control to kids, which, right, in the short run, might be chaotic, might be a little bit hectic, right? It might not have a direct connection to the outcomes of school that are part of the standards and benchmarks and assessments and all those kinds of things. But the trade-off is that it's setting them up for better long-term success, because all of those things that we say kids don't have by the time they get to high school, executive function, social skills, the list goes on and on and on. But then we say they don't have those things because they haven't been trained, they haven't been practiced in this iterative form in the same way that all of the other skills of school have been, right? Kids are going to know about X, Y, and Z thing, but they're not going to have practiced executive skills, communication, collaboration, all those things that play actually really helps structure and benefit. One thing that's really cool to supplement that from the Lego Foundation again is they have a really wonderful video. I think, Chris, let's just go to that video. We don't need to go through that PDF now.
So the world no longer rewards people for what they know. Instead, the reward is for what we can do with what we know. This is the new reality our children face. Life-changing technologies, jobs that haven't even been invented, and all sorts of challenges that we can't foresee. This means that what children learn and how they learn it must also change to look a lot more like the way we naturally learn, through play. But what does that look like in practice? Here are 5 characteristics of learning through play.
It is really interesting. I don't want to leverage too much of the other video that we just did surrounding all those different
Yeah.
key terms and ideas surrounding progressive education. But I think that is a very common sense way of describing this, which is when we're talking about restoring humanity to education, what we're literally saying is going back to the basics of learning through play, making connective experiences together, and going out there and doing things. It's a very natural and human thing to do, as opposed to putting kids into 45-minute periods and drilling and killing content. It's not rocket science. That is literally what we're saying.
Number 1, actively engaging. So coming up with ideas, or just learning something new, is much more likely when you're actively engaged. Does that mean to dance or to jump around? Well, it could, but it doesn't have to. It's more about becoming so involved, so invested in what you're doing, that learning happens naturally. Like when children solve a real-world problem that matters to them. As they brainstorm and conduct research interviews, they're immersing themselves in the subject. Or when they demonstrate the same level of involvement with creative technologies, Taking a hands-on approach, building models, and getting immediate feedback when the models are tested, these children are focused, eager to explore and challenge themselves.
Yeah, I love, like, through my adult pedagogical lens, like I can see sort of what the ideas and the concepts are at play, literally at play there in those things, and how much it does not look like some of the other classroom models that we've talked about a lot on our channel here, like Teach Like a Champion, right? The radical behaviorism, and all of those, or even the more awkwardly gamified class dojos and all those other kinds of things. It really, right? You can see just how different those models are. Like, go watch the Teach Like a Champion, strict, rigid, adult-oriented model, and then see these kids at play here, and just see the level of engagement and interaction, and right, frankly, like cognition that is bringing to bear in those playful spaces compared to the passivity of the adult-oriented space where you're just mimicking, modeling, trying to get the reward and avoid the punishment kind of thing.
Super key to this is that the learning's purposeful, right? It actually
Yeah.
means something to the person, something that they're proud of. It reminds me of a project I did where we had students put on a play. And it was based around local history. So the curriculum was all centered around the history of Springfield, Ohio, which is where I taught, and bringing in like Ohio history and things of that nature. And the kids came up with what they want to talk about. And the thing that they came up with, I was very nervous about because it could be interpreted in a variety of different ways, but it was about drug abuse. Because Springfield, Ohio is the second highest overdose rate of fentanyl in the country, or at least it was at the time I was teaching this. And I still remember just how intense kids were about getting it right and telling an authentic story and making the sets and the script and everything perfect. Each period had like its own set and script and show. It's just really cool. I was actually weirdly enough the other day, our waitress at a restaurant we went out to, was a girl in college, was in that class that did that play, and she was talking about like how meaningful that was to her. Like, it was like her favorite project that she did in school. In that class specifically, one of the kids was an aspiring rapper, and bringing in like their background of what was actually engaging to them, they wrote these like rap, like spoken word poetry in between each one of the scenes as we did the scene transition. That was like relating back to the experience and what it means. It was just a really like cool thing that were performed for real people. So I really like in this clip how they make sure that they stay, because I think some people will see this and go like, well, that's early childhood education. And it's not necessarily true. This is applicable to whether or not you're writing something, or if you're, coding something on a computer. It doesn't matter what it is that you're doing. You can be engaged in it.
It just makes so much more sense that these would be memorable experiences because they're encoded in embodied ways, right? Because you have an positive emotional valence attached to it. You're engaging with it in social ways, in other, right, empirical sensory ways. You're speaking, you're listening, you're creating rhythm. There's physical sensations. So it's going to be hard coded in that sucker, right? It's not just going to be this dry stuff. Again, anecdotally, but I remember my sophomore world history teacher, who actually was a colleague that then I worked with when I got into teaching full time, which was cool. But he taught like in a way that was project based in a time, I think, before, this is like the late 90s, early 2000s, before I think that was like a thing, right? And still to this day, I remember nothing from that class except the huge cool projects that we did for it, right? None of the book work, none of the worksheets, none of the other things. But I remember going and making a video with my buddies about beheading King Charles, right? We like reenacted it. We all played characters. We all did all this stuff. And then I remember writing a song about the history of Sweden. All right, what else we got?
2. Socially interactive. We can, of course, play and learn on our own. But when we share our ideas, something happens. We get the chance to see something from another perspective, to explain things, negotiate, and then reach a compromise. We learn to communicate and engage with others. Like these children, Their handyman needs more space for his tools, and the kids have decided to help. They're tackling a problem that's relevant to them and people they care about. To actually design and build a solution together requires successful social interaction. This is a way for children to practice the most important skill for future jobs, well, and life in general, being able to operate in a team.
One connection that I just made while we were watching this video is how basically it's like the same model as what this is, but really like, so this is in the context from a couple of medical researchers who were talking about how sense making works in an embodied way. All right. So what's really interesting is these are not ways of learning that we really talk about in the context of school, but these are ways that we know how learning actually works through the lens of sense making, in that it's embodied. I've said that a couple times here in this recording, but right, that just means we're not brains in jars. Right? Our brains are not separate from our body, right? They're all one thing. What you're doing when you're playing with Legos or social interactions is all engagement with the body and brain and mind all together. Right? Learning is enactive, meaning it emphasizes the active role of the individual, right, in shaping their environments. It is embedded in a context, right? You saw those girls at the table, right, smiling, talking, all those other kinds of things. They're communicating in this cultural context. It's extended, meaning that cognition and experience can include tools, artifacts, and technologies. There's Pappert's constructionism coming back, right? There's Lego building a model of the world and seeing how it works, influencing your brain. And an extended mind also extends to society and people too. So like Chris, you and I use each other all the time for thinking about things, because we each come from the perspective of education with different understanding things. There's stuff that I don't have to think about because I know that, Chris can talk about semiotics. I'll just defer to Chris on that. And then Chris will always defer to me when it comes to self-determination theory to talk about those three things, right? And it's emotional. So we're going to have an emotional response to learning in any context. And oftentimes the only outcome of the lesson is that we've learned that we hate so-and-so, or that this concept is boring, or I'm not a math person, or I don't like this. So very often that is the lesson that we learn rather than the content itself.
There's something to be said too about, in the video, they're talking about learning happens by doing things for people that you care about, which totally on board with that. But I also think there's something to be said too, that by learning in this way, you also are developing empathy for people that you may or may not, I don't want to say don't care about, but maybe just don't realize that like these perspectives exist, or that that maybe you
Become more
were
aware and
ignorant.
empathetic.
Yes, exactly. I'm just going to keep drawing upon that play project I did. I taught it at a public magnet school. So 50-ish, maybe more percent didn't live in downtown Springfield. They lived in mostly rural environments. So towards the beginning of this project, a lot of kids would say things like, well, this project doesn't matter to me because I don't live in Springfield. And you have two elements there. One, people learn that your community goes beyond literally what's right around your house. It's a 10-minute drive to downtown Springfield. It's still people that matter and connected to you in some way, shape, or form. But two, like that the problems people face in a city also face students in rural communities or in suburban communities, and that we are connected in a lot more ways than we might initially assume. So having that social interactive piece helps us build a more like just and loving world, because people actually get to talk to people and learn about people with differences in them. I mean, the only other thing I'll say on it is that it also just gives an opportunity for students to interact in the real world.
Yeah.
Not to be too like dystopic about the whole thing, but sadly, a lot of kids, especially in rural communities, do the vast majority of their interacting on social media or through like online games or through some kind of online space. And the anonymity slash the way at which our psyche operates in virtual spaces brings about, I would argue, like the worst in us, the worst in humans. And as a result, a lot of kids have very distorted views of other people, of people that are different than them, of how to interact in physical space with other people. And being able to expose folks to working cooperatively with folks in their community or just with their peers just can help deprogram that a bit. especially in 2023 and beyond, as we
Totally.
consider, social media.
Iterative. Learning isn't always about being told how to do something correctly. Sometimes it takes a few mistakes to know how to progress. Keep trying and you'll get there in the end. This is textbook iterative learning. And here too, it's all about testing, changing something around, and then testing it again.
Make it a little lower.
Iteration strengthens critical thinking and reasoning. So it all leads to a deeper sense of what works and why.
Man, I love the skateboarding analogy because it's so perfect too, right? Like you can,
Except if
you
you're
could,
skateboarding, it seems like you never get better, but that's besides the point. I feel like no one's ever good at skateboarding. Everyone's always falling, no matter how long you do it.
but what is fascinating, right, is like you could read a book about skateboarding. You could take a test about skateboarding. You can watch skateboarding videos, but ultimately you're going to have to get on the skateboard and see how no one else can skateboard for you, right? Someone else could write your college admissions essay. Someone else could do your science fair project for you. Someone else could, right, lecture at you all day about the War of 1812 or something, but you're at the end of the day you're going to have to get on the skateboard to learn how your body moves on a skateboard, how to balance. All that stuff is happening in your body. You're just going to have to do it. And not everyone's going to progress at the same rate. Not everyone needs to go through the same processes and steps. So that iterative process in a very physical way for skateboarding, but also countering that I like with like the scientific method, right? It's how kids' brains make sense of the world around them is by testing and seeing and like then adding those things to their schema about how things work. Of course, it's critical thinking. I love this video.
Right. And it's exactly the reason why we shouldn't pay lip service to the idea of learning through failure. I think we say that a
Right.
lot, but the structures and systems of school heavily are inclined to punish you for failing, whereas they should recognize that failing is part of the learning process, which is why you have to have tools to implement feedback over time. I mean, we now operate Floop. You should check out Floop. It's free, which is a tool that allows you to give feedback on student work, and then have them resubmit it until it's up the stuff, either through their peer feedback or your feedback. That is that process of iteration. And it is genuinely mind-blowing. Maybe we can link the article in the chat of as someone who's teach digital design, just the ability, or not even the ability, just the quality of work that is turned in as you continually go through this feedback process and slow down a bit. Iteration really is quite incredible.
Number 4, joyful. Learning can often take a long time, and success can seem far away. Let's be honest, it's tough if you're not enjoying it. But it is a thrill to get somewhere. And as we get more involved, we chase that. Nothing spurs you on quite like the feeling you get as you're progressing. It's also about enjoying a task for its own sake. Joy is a huge motivation to continue learning.
I don't have a lot to add to that. Again, let's think about your experience of high school. Do you remember the vast majority of the academic content in it, or do you remember like how you felt in those environments? Right, as human beings, we can't learn without those emotional attachments. And when all the pruning is done, and all the academic stuff gets forgotten, we still remember the joyful experiences, the negative experiences, if they had a particularly you know impact on your life, but going forward or something. But the day-to-day kind of book stuff, we eventually just forget.
Yeah, and I think that one of the roles of a teacher should be trying to make learning joyful. And I think one of the hardest things to do as an educator is every day when you're opening up a class and you're talking about things together, you sometimes just get that vibe that something's not right. Like everyone's just bored out of their minds or no one wants to be
Oh
doing the
God,
thing that
yeah.
you're doing. And it's that comfort level of being able to say, we're just not going to do that. No matter how
Yep.
much pressure's there, no matter like what's there. I mean, there were days where I would just take the class outside and we would play games nearly the entire period because
Yep.
that's just the space that we need to be in right there in that moment. And certainly you could say like, well, doesn't that mean that kids are going to take advantage of that, that they're going to, want to do that every single day? But I don't know. I always feel like those negative depictions of kids are just really gross, because kids know that you have things that you have to do. They know what the purpose of school is. Like they understand what your job is, and they're going to appreciate anything that you do to try to make school a more joyful space, even if it's not always that way as much as you'd like it to
Meaningful. When a task makes sense to us and builds on what we know, when we truly care, learning becomes meaningful. These children are going to remember how they went about solving the handyman's problem because it meant something to them. Learning by solving real-life problems not only benefits them as individuals, but also their families, their school, their community, and the world. When you really grasp ideas, understand how they connect, and eventually apply them in new ways, this is learning at its deepest. The world of today and tomorrow is one of challenges, but also tremendous opportunity. Gaining knowledge is one important step. Really, children need a deep understanding that allows them to apply their knowledge to different situations and then spark new ideas. This takes practice. Let's give children a chance. Let's build on how children learn through play.
And I think this just gets to the heart of why it is that I think you and I do this work, which is the big goal, the 50,000-foot goal of progressive education or human-centered education system is to build a better world. It's not just about making kids feel good or just about like getting kids to acquire more knowledge. It's about those kids then going out and making a better future because the world needs it. And we want to see those futures imagined in our own lifetimes. It's not this far away on the horizon thing where it's like, oh, maybe one day our children's children will have this like utopian society. It's like, no, I want to see a better world in 10 years. I want kids to go out there and make a better world, and we'll all do it together. And
Yep.
I think that's perfectly logical. We built and live in the systems that we built and lived in. Someone made all these things.
What I think is interesting, if you keep it on this screen, just right here, right? If we took out through play and just said, well, these are the 5 characteristics of learning. This is just learning. Let's build on how children learn. This wouldn't be a controversial topic. And it's really remarkable that when we say children learn through play, that has to be something that's separate, right, from saying how children learn or how children learn in school. Right? There's no distinction between the two things. You know what I'm saying? There's not a divide between the two. It's an entirely artificial kind of construction of school that we have to learn in a different way than we would in a way that's meaningful, joyful, iterative through social interaction, whatever. That's just how kids learn. The structures and systems of school demand that we somehow redefine it.
I feel like I probably should have brought this up earlier, but my last year teaching, I did a Lego project. We did a project where students, it was like a collaboration between multiple different subject areas, but the overall idea was to analyze city planning and building utopian-esque society. So diving into that trope of if you attempt to build a utopia, then you ultimately build a dystopia. But the project was, hey, you're going to have a limited number of Lego, which has been driving me nuts, by the way, that you keep saying Legos. It is Lego. It's Pearl, just so you know. But you have a limited number of Lego.
Just like we learned pierogies is plural and pirogue is apparently the singular. If you have one pierogi, that's a pirogue.
That's still wild to me. My family's Polish and I didn't know that. But anyways, you have a limited number of Lego. And you had to construct an interpretation of your city. And then as you construct the interpretation of your city, and we had like a city planning document, like all this stuff where it was like, how are you going to deal with this, and this? We then created a bunch of what we called like scenario cards or something that we would give to groups to either stress them with a new scenario or create a custom issue that made sense for their city. So I remember like this one group built, without realizing it, the city from BioShock. I don't think any of them have played BioShock. If you haven't played BioShock, BioShock is this like it's a critique of Ayn Rand, actually, that's diving into like ultra individualism. What's Ayn Rand's thing?
Objectivism?
Objectivism. Yeah, it's a critique of objectivism. And it's built underwater. So these kids built this entire city underwater where people would go and like live out their dreams because they're separated from the rest of society. So their scenario card was like, okay, you have all these people down in the water. Can they leave or are they just stuck there? Like there's no system for them to get up and down. And ultimately what these kids built after a period of about 2 months, give or take, with a couple days a week, is this almost like a prison. Like they ended up building more dystopian than even you would expect, where in their attempt to create this like elite high class society where people lived underwater, they built this place where people were trapped, couldn't leave, and they had to obey the rules of the state. So by learning through play, because it is quite silly, but by learning by building like these like little scenarios and these Lego, kids learn about deep underlying themes of like democracy, authoritarianism, city planning, criminal justice. We even dove into like water pressure because at a certain point we were talking about like, wouldn't they get crushed if they were underwater like that? Like, how does that work? And they had to like do like a little bit of research into that. And we brought in the science teacher. It's messy because not everyone learned the same thing because not all the cities were underwater, but it's all of these things, right? It's active, it's social, it's iterative, it's joyful, and it's meaningful. It makes sense at that particular moment in time of the thing that they're doing. And for the most part, everybody enjoyed it. That was a cool little thing. And we use Lego for it.
So one of the, I won't call this extreme, but I'll call it like a radical, just because it's a more out there. I don't say that in a negative way. It's just kind of the most truest expression of these ideas, right? Not even in the concept. This does not fit into a concept of traditional school at all, but we'll link to it. I'll put a card up here for something. But last year, one of the keynotes for our Conference to Restore Humanity was Dr. Denisha Jones. And one of her specialties is working in the concept of liberatory play and liberation through play. And she brought to our audience and to our attention this Anji True Play movement, which is based out of an approach created in China that they say is grounded in love, risk, joy, engagement, and reflection. AnjiPlay returns the right of true play to every child. And what Chris is scrolling through there is just the list of some of those values, and you can kind of see how it's a lot like a Montessori method in the sense that it has some pretty tried and true principles that you would stick to if you were like doing an Anji True Play. And since it's kind of a hard thing.
Unlike Montessori, my understanding of AnjiPlay is that Montessori is a little more structured. Like Montessori has laid out activities that you do and replicate. But
right.
True Play is like the kids are determining what to do with everything. Like it is truly like, here's a bunch of random stuff, go have fun, and they make their own rules.
Right. So I'm not saying that it's like Montessori in the sense that it is like pedagogically similar. I'm just saying like it is like its own model. It's its own method.
Okay.
You know, it's not like it's its own vision of a thing. So if you go to let's see here, like the rights and responsibilities of True Play and about True Play or like about Anji or one of those things. Okay, cool. Yeah, so pretty much these are the ideas about that fuel what true play is. So kids select materials, determine their use, self-structured, select the people they want to play with, play in large groups, small groups, etc., or not to at all. And so the adult responsibilities in that are support but not direct, allow for child-initiated risk-taking, collaboration, all of those things, provide emotional support, and have confidence in children's capacities and abilities, be interested and curious, observe children's play, et cetera, but don't direct or interfere. It's truly child directed. So those are the outlines of the humans. What about the time and space? Where does true play
Yeah,
happen if you
really
scroll
quick. This
down?
just reminds me
Oh
of
yeah.
like where folks are at. I mean, this has been a thing for a while, but I see it pop up more and more with parenting, where
Yeah.
like the norm is to be like a quote unquote good parent or to help kids be more creative. Basically, let your kids do what they want as long as they're not hurting anyone. So if your kid is like, I don't know, like wearing their shirt the wrong direction because they think it's funny, okay, like that's fine.
Right.
Like there's
Who
people have a
cares?
tendency to overcorrect or um like police what their kids are doing in an effort to make them fit into the norm, or I would argue perhaps even control them. Um, but it stifles their ability to think creatively about the world, which is what this
Yeah.
is getting into as well.
So then, like in the time and space, right? Here's clearly delineated rights for kids and adults. Kids determine where, when, and how to use things. They can move freely. They determine the pace. The adults just ensure that kids have the time and space to play. So, like, adults are just protective of the space. Then, on reflection and expression, kids have the right to be heard without judgment. Adults listen to kids and with an interest. Because part of the AnjiPlay is actually after they have these play sessions, they actually do these like not quite guided reflections, but something that's like that, right? They reflect on their experiences and kids explain what they were doing and the adults will listen. And then as far as the what they're playing with here, kids have rights to open-ended materials. They select, organize, respond to kids' needs, access materials that are safe and sturdy, stored in a manner that's accessible, allows the kid to take responsibility. Again, adults' responsibilities are just to maintain them, provide an introduction to the materials, reflect on their use, adjust materials in response to kids' needs. And I think there might be one more thing here too, as far as physical environments. Yeah. And you just kind of get the idea here. But essentially, in the physical environment, if you scroll down here, you'll see that the adults really only role in this is to, oh, I thought there was maybe just a couple things, but just to ensure a safe environment, right? So it's kind of an interesting thing. So if this is hard for you to envision, like probably it is for in a quote unquote formal education setting, fortunately, there's this wonderful instructional video that can actually show what Anji True Play looks like. And so let's just watch and see and listen to the narration and see. I don't know, Chris, we can talk about how this, because this makes me feel a little bit anxious too. So I'll be curious to see your reaction.
Even though this is taking place in an early childhood setting, the AnjiPlay people see this both in like high school, middle school students. They probably wouldn't be grouped like that, but for older learners as well as for adult learners, like seeing the value of play for everyone.
And real quick, before you play the video, sorry, um, on the Anji website, there again, they list their principles as 5 principles of love, risk, joy, engagement, and reflection. There we go. Sorry. On the Anji True Play website, similar to the Legos, they list their 5 values as love, risk, joy, engagement, and reflection. So I'm seeing a lot of overlap in these different frameworks that center play, and they're all pointing in relatively the same direction, even if they're using different language. But even in the case of Lego and Anji, joy, engagement, love, reflect, they're all the same thing, right? They're all
Right.
pointing the same way. Let's watch this in action.
It's almost 9 a.m. in Anji, and class is about to start. But in this kindergarten, children won't sit in front of a blackboard. They spend their mornings outdoors. After a warm-up, it's time to build.
We are building a shop. A coffee shop to sell tea, pudding and cakes. The teacher told us to build whatever we want the way we want.
In AnjiPlay, children from 3 to 6 choose how they play and with whom. They can do things other preschools won't allow, like painting real cars. The concept, called True Play, was found by Cheng Shui-Xing 15 years ago.
Traditionally, in Chinese education, teachers teach and students listen. Now we've given the kids the right to play. They're free to move from indoors to outdoors. Our children are happy, and I think happiness is very important in life. They can also focus on a task. They need it during the games. It's a valuable asset for their future studies.
In the playground, teachers film every child during the activities. They're specially trained to observe the kids and learn about their behavior. Every day, playtime ends with a debrief in class.
This to me is very similar to self-directed education centers, or SDE
Yeah.
environments. And I think
Yeah.
there is a difference. I think that the way that we frame progressive education, so self-directed education centers typically are spaces where students are free to ostensibly do whatever they want as long as it is within like community norms. So they're exploring their own interests, and then a teacher is there, or a guide is there to help them ensure that they are getting along with others and that they're doing something that can help them, or not. They're just not harming other individuals. And I think where progressive education comes into the field, at least in our interpretation of it, is that there's more of a role of a teacher. I'm like 80% of the way there to this. Early childhood, I don't think it actually matters. Early childhood, I'm all the way here. But as the learners get older, I think that a sizable amount of the curriculum could look like that, where students are kind of pursuing their own endeavors. But I think there is a purpose to a student choosing their own endeavors with a trusted adult that's helping them get there. So in that
Yeah.
example we used earlier, I'm signing up for a course that fits the way that I like to learn and is over something that interests me, but the teacher is still there to help craft that curriculum with me, because there is value in having like an elder figure, right? Like someone who is there that is trained in this, that can help you learn things better. That's why we hire tutors and things like that, because we enjoy it.
And
And
that's the
also,
role of the adult
yeah,
in this context, it looks like too, right? Is to help them reflect on, these and help kids. We just said, like, you don't learn from experience, you learn from reflecting on experience. So this is a pause at the end of the day to help kids, actually help make connections and help to see, right? Because the teachers are outside observers, they get to see the whole picture, right? They get to be the ones that kind of like, push kids cognitively to help make those connections. While in the flow state of play, kids just get to be in the moment, like, focused and fixated on what they're doing. And then the teachers get there to elevate their perspective and help build the connections. It's a really interesting balance between the two.
right. And this is great. But I do think as the kids get older and you're just like telling kids like, hey, here's some stuff, figure out what you want to do with it. I
Right.
do think there's value in walking into a classroom and the teacher having a plan for like, hey, this is the overall idea of what we're going for, or to like let kids vote on different activities or choose
Sure.
between them. So it can just be a little bit more intensive. Like I personally wouldn't want, like if I were in school, wouldn't want to go to an environment where it was like choose whatever you want to do that way that day, because I sometimes struggle with figuring out what it is that I want to do. But if I had
Right.
like 10 pathways to choose from and one of them was like programming, like I want to go learn how to do that, and I want to have an adult there to help me figure out how to do that, not just like learn
Right.
it on my own. Like I
Yeah. I
need to
just
have
don't want
kind
like
of
an independent study because I'll just do that on my own. But
right.
the interesting
Um,
part, right, is you're I think the maybe not the worst aspect, right? But the worst thing that we could do, is have kids go through this structured, formalized thing where they don't get the ability to make these decisions, and then like ninth or 10th grade, then say, "Oh, now we're going to do all these things. Now we're going to," and then kids flounder, rightfully so. I saw it with my own eyes. I taught 10th graders and I taught seniors, and we did PBL in my senior social studies courses, right? So these are kids at the end of their school career, and they had never done an open-ended project-based learning thing before, where I was like, okay, literally pick anything in the world that you want to learn about or do or make a connection to. What's a problem you want to solve? What's a career or job you want to dig into? Like you're going to have part of this semester that we have together to help build those connections. And some kids would go, I have no idea. Nobody's ever asked me that before. And it's like, you've been in
mm,
school the longest. You should be the best at this. And they aren't. But what I see stuff like Anji and the stuff we watched in the Lego Foundation supporting is actually then a trajectory for those skills by the time kids leave formal education because maybe they're not going to go to college, whatever, right? But they should at least have those foundations at a young age rather than start to build them in ninth or 10th grade where it's quote unquote too late, maybe because they haven't had that practice. They're so used to one way of doing things, and we do this bait and switch to them. And that kind of sucks for the
Yeah.
kids.
And to be clear too, neither of us are saying that this shouldn't happen. It's just that as the kids get older, that unstructured experience can have some structure. But
Yeah.
still, like, it should be way less structure than it is now. I'm like 80 to 90% of the way there with this. Like that would be the primary element. It was the primary element of a lot of the stuff that I did when I was teaching.
They want to explain what they're doing, and they do so with confidence, because it's something they've experienced. It's also something which develops their language skills. What's more, during the construction process, they encounter problems, like mathematical problems.
The preschool stresses the importance of autonomy. Children organize the lunch area on their own and help themselves with food. Afterwards, it's nap time.
This is great, though. They all
Soft
take a
music
nap.
helps
This
them
is awesome.
relax, and in 10 minutes, all is quiet in a school of 500 pupils. The AnjiPlay concept is attracting lots of attention across China and even in the United States.
This year I went to San Francisco, Boston, and Madison. In Madison, there's a kindergarten for disadvantaged people, mostly Afro-Americans. They really want to implement AnjiPlay in their school.
But in the beginning, Mrs. Chen had a tough time convincing Chinese parents. They are afraid of the dirt and the risks. It took them a while to realize the benefits of learning while playing, especially for a generation of single children.
My son has no choice but to play with other kids, to cooperate with them in order to finish the construction. He's bad-tempered, even violent sometimes. Thanks to the games, gradually his behavior has improved.
14,000 children are taking part in the AnjiPlay curriculum in China's Zhejiang province. According to the organization, AnjiPlay is set to become part of China's national kindergarten standards.
That's cool. What I think is so interesting, right, is they mentioned that issue of single kids. So many single child families in China don't have other siblings to play and socialize with. So often it is isolating, and or maybe parents aren't equipped to be able to play with their kids. But if they can bring them into this context with guided, trusted professionals, know that not only are their kids safe, but they get to take these risks and do the things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do just due to their family circumstances. Well, then parents too are realizing how much of a boon that is going to be to their kids' future success, not just academics, but like, how is my kid, who might otherwise just be isolated and, just owing to social policies, how can they actually be successful in a world that involves collaboration and cooperation and co-construction of these things? So it's really cool to see how this model has spread in a place like China, where I think we often associate authoritarian pedagogies and practices and things. But here is this really radical, I don't know, again, you said Montessori, but it really is Western style. This is like Sudbury. This is like a Brome, I don't associate this necessarily with the politics of China.
I mean, it's just fascinating because I can't help but think about, like, what does the future hold if the vast majority of young people are raised in this way? Because something that kids tell us is that as they have grown older, even like third, fourth, fifth grade, that they just aren't able to communicate with other people. Or if they do, it's in like these hyper rigid, controlled 5 to 10 minute, like share or think, pair, share type activities where they're just briefly talking to each other. They don't really have a lot of opportunities to connect with other people. Like, schools have banned cell phones. You can't have cell phones in class. You can't talk to people in the hallways at some schools. If you can, it's like 3 to 5 minutes, and you're just right into another quiet, fairly controlled environment. And just the effect that has to have on your psyche of not being able to connect with other human beings, especially as our society again becomes more and more disconnected from the physical world. Like kids like nowadays play video games online, or they might
Darn
tag each
kids.
other on TikTok or whatever. And I don't know, that scares me. That's one of the things that scares me about like the future, is that when we were kids, this sounds super like back
We're
in
gonna
my
get
day.
curmudgeon Chris. Here we go,
Uh,
curmudgeonly Chris.
but like we were like one of the final generations of kids who grew up and went and played outside with our friends, and that was like a normal thing that you did. And kids obviously still do that. I'm not saying that they don't, but it's becoming more and more likely that kids are being raised in virtual and screen-based environments, even in school, as more and more schools get rid of recess in the name of counteracting learning loss. And
Right.
that's a scary thing to say, that you're gonna have a group of kids who are brought up in isolation or who only understand the world through the internet, which is not something that you want. That is not a good idea.
That's true. Well, what's so fascinating with what you said there, like think, pair, shares, that's like the limit of your social interaction. What do you do then if you're not in adult directed environments where you're told what to think and how to say it, and not given a sentence frame and a model and all those other, you have to figure it out for yourself. So yeah, the worry and the risk really is then if kids haven't had the ability to figure it out for themselves and have the autonomy to engage in these socially constructed learning environments, not just for recess and for some other things too, but actually embedded into the framework of school. Then what does that mean when they're not in school? How do they interact? How is their world shaped by those interactions? It's at some point they have got to take the reins for themselves. But
Right.
so often in schools, if kids do those things and they act out in social, see, I even said act out in social ways, they're punished, or those things are
Mm.
disincentivized, right? So it's like the kids who can hold on to their independence and autonomy kind of get punished for it inside of school, even though those might be the things that are more successful for them in the long run. That's the catch-22.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why so many adults are not purposeful. We have that from our own research that we reference a lot through Dr. William Damon. But also, like, just anecdotally, the reason why so many folks our age and above face things like midlife crises, they struggle with questions like, beyond what do you do? Like, how many people, their entire life is completely encaptured by the thing that they do for a living, and everything is about networking and getting ahead, and not really about like living in community or with other people. Like the school to work pipeline is quickly enveloping a lot of people's entire livelihoods and who they are as a person. And I think there's a direct connection to be made between this kind of deconstruction of schooling as a concept and living more holistic, like interconnected lives with other people in meaningful ways.
Make room for play, right? Play is learning. There's no distinction between the two. And educate yourselves so you can teach other people about the same ideas. Reference the documents. We'll drop all those things in the description. Share those with people so they can see too the cognitive, social, emotional power of play. Thanks for watching. Hey, thanks for watching. Let us know what you think about the video in the comments below. All right, we'll see you.